there, my name's TheTrueNev, I'm the only me there is, and welcome back to the Satisfactory non-series, episode 25 this time, where, as you can see, we've got everything, and I do mean everything, fully hooked up. Everything, every conveyor belt, well, not every cable, but you know. And in the case where, well, these aren't connected, or like this one over here, this output, that's because, as we knew from last time, we're missing a couple of buildings, such as, in the case of this large area, the particle accelerators at the ends of the hallways, or, the focus of today's episode, the train station, which will be placed at the top of the main building. Now, other than building the actual station, I have to amend a few of the factories in and around Titan Forest. Those factories being the Big Donut, otherwise known as my aluminium factory, the area under the supercomputer factory, two of them actually, the petrochemicals plant, and the quartz annex. All four of those need to be amended, but before I actually get to that, I thought I'd show you something that I've been working on in the meantime. Now, this is something I wanted to show off actually at the end once everything was done, but I figured I could show it off right now and not really lose much in the process. So, for context, you know how I've mentioned before I don't like clipping unless it's absolutely necessary, or minimal, or really out of sight? Well, I'm starting to become a little flexible regarding that, since I've seen a lot of very nice builds involving circles and curves, and so I started experimenting on my own, and the end result is, for example, this little curved walkway. Looks nice, right? Now, the way I avoided, or rather circumvented, the issue with clipping was by using these things here. And as you can see here, yes, this is the sort of thing I hate already. The clipping of the actual textures. There's no way around that, though there are certain fixes. Like, I could change this texture, for example. Put down, say, this one. Doesn't look particularly nice, but it works, right? The actual textures don't clip through each other anymore. But this doesn't exactly look right for the aesthetics, right? So, for the most part, I guess I could just ignore this sort of thing. Getting this to work in and of itself, like the curve actually lining up, was harder than it seemed, so I really don't care about the clipping in this case anymore. Anything that's too noticeable in the future, sure, but this, I can live with this. And, case in point, I had a hard time lining up the end of the curve with this part of the foundation, and even then, as you can see over here, I couldn't get them to fully line up. They would have had to clip through each other, but my fix for that was doing this. Back at the nuclear waste refinement building, I also did something, because I didn't like seeing this corner of my building be so jagged. I went and did this, a nice straight line, or rather a diagonal line, depending on how you look at it. And honestly, I already love the way it looks. Again, there's some minimal clipping on the roof, but how often am I gonna look at the roof or the ceiling? Never. That's when. Never. So yeah, I've just been playing around with these things. And there's one last thing I'm gonna partially show you this episode, but not entirely, because I do want to leave that for the episode where I inaugurate the actual facility, as what I'm gonna show you right now is actually an integral part of it. And that is this little tunnel type structure right here. Note the word tunnel because that is what it will be, but also, as you can already tell from this point, yeah, okay. You see, these are the half pipe, quarter pipe, whatever you want to call them, foundations, but they're like a step in. This is 3, but I managed to make the pipe into 2, again using the special clipping techniques and zooping and all that Update 5 readily made available, because honestly that's the only way I could have made those curves and all that. But yeah, I don't want to show you the inside just yet because that's important. Anywho, onto the actual episode, shall we? So I started the episode off by building the actual train station and the freight stations. I toyed around with positioning, with the heights of foundations, and with lights, until I found the right place for everything. I had to consider the placement of the freight stations in particular, because their placement here was ultimately determined by their placement in other stations, such that if I wanted to deliver a certain material to a certain station, I really had to think things through. Once the position was satisfied, I got to setting down the last of the conveyor belts and conveyor lifts. It was at this point that I could definitely say that everything was 100% connected, except of course for the cables. Moving on, and in the order that I just mentioned, the next place I went to was my aluminium factory in Titan Forest. The place I call the Big Donut because it's got that big hole in the middle. Now this place I had always planned to actually change to have more than the 3 refineries that I have now. Hence why there are more holes in this area than there are refineries. And the original idea called for me having placed these smelters or constructors in the hallway between the actual storage area and the refinery area. However, once I built it all up, I liked the way it came out, and looking at it now, I realized I couldn't actually add more refineries because that wouldn't look as good anymore. It would change a bit of the fundamental layout I had already set down. So instead I opted to overclock. I couldn't do it just yet, but by opting to overclock, I could simply construct the extra constructors that you see here, changing of course a bit of the recipes in the refineries, thus that I could make everything that I needed. In this case, I needed to make extra aluminum casing, which is already being transported out into a freight station, and these would be specifically used for making the iodine gas masks. After that, I went to my supercomputer factory, the main hub of Titan Forest. Specifically, and firstly, to the area immediately under it. Why here? Well, simple. Because here I have 3 foundries, as you can see, each making about 100 copper ingots. And I'm gonna need a lot more than that to feed every aspect of the nuclear factory, of the endgame factory. And so I decided to expand this to have as many foundries as I can, spitting out as many copper ingots as I can. And since Mark V conveyor belts, the last tier of them, carry a maximum of 780 items per minute, I thought, okay, I can overclock here too. Just have a row of foundries making literally 1560 copper ingots that would then be transported to the freight station nearby. And for that, I made an extra conveyor belt that would go down the middle, where unlike before, I only had 2. Similarly in this area, or rather right under the train station where my coal nodes are, I wanted to do the exact same thing. Feed as much coal as I could into the freight station because I knew I'd need a whole lot of it. Not sure exactly how much, but better to maximize as much as possible. So again, adding a constructor to one of the other nodes, thus having 2 pure nodes supplying all the coal I could, I made 2 conveyor lifts instead of 1, both carrying 780 each, ensuring that every time a train comes and takes either coal ingots or coal from the station, it will quickly fill back up. And hopefully that will suffice to feed every factory that this one freight station is connected to. Next, we move on to the 3rd area, the petrochemicals factory in Titan Forest. Every time I look at it, I just think this place is so pretty. But anywho, you recall a while back, I mentioned I wanted to build something on the lake. I did have some plans in mind, and in fact those plans involved making a turbo fuel factory. But the more I visited this place and the more I got a view of the lake, the more I realized I don't want to do that. I mean, I want turbo fuel, I want to basically try making everything in the game, but specifically here, blocking such a beautiful view wouldn't make me feel good. So, I tried to make what I needed to make here, off to the side. But I quickly realized that I don't have enough space, so instead I chose this little corner right here. And this corner is good enough because it doesn't block my view, and I can fit all that I need to fit. Now, what am I fitting in here? The answer is enough refineries to supply the freight station here with as much petroleum coke as possible. The petroleum coke being needed for the aluminium portion of my endgame factory. I toyed around with spacing and placed things down, and at one point this bastard didn't want to leave me alone. Honestly, I did not want the company, so I just kept building on without him. And in the end, I came up with this design for the factory. Small, compact, and the most impressive part of all, at least for me, was how quickly I managed to make it. For such an improv device, I kind of liked the way it came out. I turned it on, and once I made sure it was working, I moved on to the last area. And the last area was, as I mentioned before, the Quartz Annex. Now this place, I honestly love the way it came out, and I never planned on expanding it, but the fact that there was enough space to do so meant that I could. And in this case, I need to expand as much as possible. So I extended the foundation out towards the other end of the train platform, mimicked all the walls and windows and all that, and placed down the necessary amount of constructors, i.e. 10 for each, because I did the math and I needed exactly 450 quartz crystals and 750 silica. That I could do with 10 overclocked constructors each, with their base recipes because I don't have any water nearby to actually try making other types of crystals, and furthermore I would actually need the Mark III miners. So like a lot of other things, I would have to first wait until I could turn on part of the endgame factory to get the materials to make Mark III miners, and then, you know, the old song and dance before I can get everything up and running. However, setting all this up was as important as getting the miners themselves. So once I finished placing everything down and replacing the empty freight platforms with freight stations, I was done. So, now, officially, the setup is complete. Barring, of course, maybe having to check in case I missed anything, this place is officially ready to start. Well, almost. I know, I hate myself for saying that too, but it actually is. Everything's connected up so that I could just turn it on, but as I've mentioned several times before and a lot in this episode, 2 key words here, or rather key phrases. The first is minor Mark III. I need to get those to properly turn this on, and the other is overclocking, for which I'm gonna do one last thing, but not in this episode, because there's not a lot of time for that. But I will show that off in the next episode, which is I have to farm my doggos, because I need to get a literal metric buttload of power shards. First and foremost, to do a whole lot of overclocking in this area, and then, well, the overclocking, if any, that takes place in this area. A lot of it will be in the miners themselves, some in a couple of factories where the math was a little off. But we're close now, and definitely by next episode, I mean, I'm gonna try to run things in the meantime, after the farming of course, but by next episode, we should have everything turned on such that I can then put up all the walls. It's exciting to think that this is almost done. I've thought that for every episode. Every episode I'm like, yes, I'm almost done. And then it's like, no, I'm not. I'm still missing some things. But honestly, the closer we get, the more excited I am. Can't wait till everything's done, especially these tunnels. Because this is also part of the tunnel thing I mentioned before. Just you wait. That's all I can say. But anyway, for now, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Satisfactory Non-series. If you liked it, then you know what to do. But as always, I'm the only me, so you be the only you. See you in the next episode where everything should be turning on beautifully.